Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you all today. Briahna, what are we getting into?
Well, Aaron Mate is going to help us wade through some of the latest developments out of Ukraine. And Anti-War's Dave DeCamp will break down the escalating tensions around House Speaker Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. Then Texas GOP congressional candidate Cassie Garcia will discuss her campaign and the seismic shift among Latino voters toward the GOP. And our colleague Julia Manchester breaks down what's happening in today's Arizona primary race and what some key takeaways are as we look forward to other races.
That's a lot of stuff, so we're looking forward to talking about that in a bit. But first, on Monday evening, President Biden addressed the nation to confirm a CIA drone strike over the weekend that killed top al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri, who succeeded Osama bin Laden as the leader of al-Qaeda. Let's watch.
My fellow Americans, on Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed the emir of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Now, justice has been delivered, and this terrorist leader is no more. People around the world no longer need to fear the vicious and determined killer. The United States continues to demonstrate our resolve and our capacity to defend the American people against those who seek to do us harm.
Al-Zawahiri was reportedly a key figure behind 9/11 and took over after Osama bin Laden's death. American intelligence reports that the two missiles fired at al-Zawahiri did not kill anyone else. So it is interesting. So he came to this compound in Kabul in Afghanistan, it was a Taliban safe house that he's been living in. I guess his family moved in there first, and then he's been there. I'm not quite sure when he moved in, but he hasn't left there in a very long time. Apparently we, the CIA, through our assets or whatever it is, we figured out that he was there and have been kind of tracking him for a long time. I think they made a model of his base, and they figured out his routine, and then so they fired these two drone missiles that killed him while he was on a balcony, and only killed him, and according to them, and it's probably the truth, it did not harm anyone else, which is good news.
Yeah, most certainly. It's not always how these things go.
No, sometimes it's not the right target, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, so I mean, the question a lot of people are asking is, rightly or wrongly, what the political consequences of this are going to be, and whether Biden is hopeful that this will be a feather in his cap during a time when there's not many victories that he can claim. You know, what do you think? Is this something that people are going to respond positively to, and is going to be seen as an indicator that Biden is, quote unquote, doing something, as so many people have been urging?
I mean, I think fairly or not, people will see it as, understandably, as a positive. This person was very involved in the planning of 9/11. There are some intelligence officials who believe he was actually even more involved and was more the intellectual architect of it, even more so than Osama bin Laden. It's a win for Biden, just like it was a win for Obama when bin Laden was killed. Yeah, now that's mostly the work of.
Consider it to be a win.
Well,
for
no,
Obama,
no,
exactly.
and it is true that it's mostly the work of intelligence officials, and it could have happened probably under any administration, and is not. If there's major differences in strategy being dictated to these intelligence agencies by the different presidents, that would be news to me. I don't think that's the case. In fact, probably these agencies operate a little too independently and do their own thing, regardless of who's telling them what to do in the White House. Probably the most interesting policy question that emerges is, given the pullout from Afghanistan, we had an agreement with the Taliban. Trump had made this agreement. Biden had, kind of co-signed it after becoming president, that the Taliban would not do exactly what they did there. And it was obviously naive, I guess, to think that they wouldn't shelter al-Qaeda terrorists, but here they are doing exactly what they agreed not to do. And then the question becomes, is it easier? And I'm sure, more interventionist people, maybe in the Republican Party, maybe not, maybe in the Democratic Party. Whoever is the interventionist party at this point, I'm not sure, will make the case that this is the danger of pulling out of these countries, or pulling out of Afghanistan. And if we've been there, we have more control on the ground or something over that. Now, I reject that argument.
Yeah, that's the Democratic Party's takeaway.
Right.
They will.
To be clear, I am not endorsing that at all. I'm saying that's what others are going to say. The other way of looking at it is this shows we do not need a ground presence there. We can continue to kill absolutely legitimate targets like al-Zawahiri. I don't think, in my view, he's absolutely a legitimate target under our existing authorization to fight terrorism. We don't need a massive ground presence there to get people like that, is kind of the other side of the argument.
Yeah, no, I get it. I do think, I saw, some questions about, there's a generalized concern about the limits of our use of drones, generally speaking. But to the pro-drone camp, this is a clear victory, in part because it didn't cost us any American lives, and obviously it also didn't have these ancillary consequences that so many of these kinds of strikes do. So, we'll see if this moves the needle in any way, shape, or form. It does, it does feel like so many years, 21 years after, 9/11, when the country and the mood has shifted so dramatically from where it was at the time.
It's a very different country from 9/11 in every way.
With completely different political stakes to these kinds of things. Even when it was closer to the fact, Democrats have never really gotten a lot in the way of credit. It feels a little gross to frame it that way, but not much in the way of credit for these kinds of attacks. And now that the world has shifted into a place where there's a huge appetite for non-interventionism, and people generally see a lot of what happens overseas as a distraction, rightly or wrongly, a distraction from the administration's failure to address concerns at home, I wonder if this is going to have much of an effect at all.
That's a good point. I mean, this will probably be a one-day news story. There's so much going on, and really a one-day news story because there's so much more of interest to voters and consumers of news right now. There's so much more to be worried about. 20 years ago, this would have been all people talked about. Right. They would have been celebrating. The mood of the country was so different. Maybe not necessarily healthier. Not that the mood of the country is healthy now.
Correct.
But, Washington Post White House reporter Tyler Pager had noted that one of Biden's most successful weeks, if you want to call this a successful week, and I think it's fair to, it's come while he's been under COVID isolation following the CHIPS bill passage, Manchin and Schumer's agreement on inflation reduction, and now the death of al-Zawahiri. Meanwhile, CNN analyst and anchor John Avlon celebrated the administration. Let's watch that.
I found myself being so emotional at this news because this is, in some ways, been the shoe that didn't drop, even 10 years after bin Laden, knowing that, or thinking that Zawahiri was still out there. And the fact that the U.S. took him out with a drone strike and took such care to minimize civilian casualties, apparently having none. That's more than Zawahiri or his colleagues did every day of their lives, where they intentionally targeted civilians to kill. And that's what makes this, I think, such a profound moment for the country and for just everyone who lived through 9/11.
However, Fox News' Tucker Carlson had a different reaction to the news, as you might expect. Here's Tucker's take.
A speech boasting that he's killed an al-Qaeda figure in Afghanistan. Great. Feel safer? Of course you don't. Nobody does. And the reason nobody feels safer is Biden's response to the disaster in Afghanistan. Rather than pause and learn from it, maybe fire the people responsible for it, not simply the self-destructive withdrawal from Afghanistan, but also the pointless 20-year war there, rather than do any of that like a normal person would do, Biden immediately set off in another direction, provoking yet another conflict, this one in Eastern Europe. And he provoked it. They lie about it, but it's true. The facts are out there, and it's very obvious. So just days after the Russian government announced yet again that if Ukraine joined NATO didn't even want Ukraine to join, but if Ukraine were to join NATO, then the Russian army would invade Ukraine.
He's raising a lot of legitimate points, and we're going to discuss Ukraine and Taiwan in much greater detail on the show in a little bit. I kind of wanted to respond to what John Avlon was saying, that was the CNN contributor, about that. Well, yes, there is no moral equivalence whatsoever between the U.S. and al-Qaeda. Obviously, that is true. Al-Qaeda deliberately kills innocent people. But we have, through our drone program, also inadvertently, but still, it doesn't matter to them, killed innocent people, mistakenly, fine. So it's great that in this case there were no civilians killed, but there was a little bit of we're being really congratulatory of ourselves for 30 days without a workplace incident here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a weird framing for him to admit in that same sentence, it's amazing that there were no civilian casualties because all the time we have civilian casualties, and that's what the bad guys do every day. And connecting the dots that would tacitly make you the bad guy in all but this instance, it was a really odd framing. The Tucker Carlson response, I think, is expected. Do you think it's entirely fair? Do you think it's entirely fair to pivot immediately from, you got the bad guy to, but you also are doing this bad thing? I mean, I agree with the substantive criticism of the provocation and all of the things that we've discussed with respect to the United States not taking responsibility for its role in the crisis in Ukraine and its continued role in continuing it, many would argue. But, it does feel a little bit like, as a leftist who's never been particularly triumphant about these kinds of moments, it's weird to have seen the shift where there was a time when conservatives would at least applaud these kinds of moments. We got the bad boy, cowboys and Indian style. This is a classic moment that Republicans used to applaud, even if you also have another criticism of the broader foreign policy approach.
Although I think I do remember Tucker being, and forgive me if this is totally wrong, but if I recall, Tucker was a little critical of the Soleimani strike as well, which under Trump. One of several, actually, moments where Tucker, who I think is much more ideologically committed or who's thought out what Republican non-interventionism should look like, certainly more so than Donald Trump, actually called Donald Trump out for deviating from that. So I think it's pretty consistent in his case. Now, yes, obviously, should we take a minute to recognize that it's a good thing al-Zawahiri got destroyed? Yes. But it is also fair to criticize the Ukraine. Maybe you shouldn't do them in the same breath because they're different things. But I think you do to some extent, substantially agree with what are we doing in Ukraine? Now we're going to add Taiwan to the mix.
For sure.
Biden ramped us down on one front and then immediately committed to this other one that is going very badly. There's a New York Times column from Thomas Friedman, who's never someone I say you have to read Thomas Friedman. You have to read this column. It is very bad about the approach on both these fronts, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But first, we'll have my radar, right?
Yes, it's your radar.
It's my radar. I was going to say it's Briahna's radar, but it's actually my radar. So I hope you're all looking forward to that.